In 364 CE, the Council of Laodicea voted a book out of the Bible. Not because it was false, because it was too specific. The Book of Enoch names names. It gives locations. It describes physical beings with bloodlines that could be traced, and buried in chapters the church called dangerous for 17 centuries is a passage that has never been adequately explained by mainstream scholarship. It describes a lineage that was not supposed to survive the flood. A bloodline God did not authorize. A genetic line that came through the water anyway, not by accident, but by design, carried by the women who bore the children of the Watchers, women whose descendants the flood did not reach because they had already been moved. Enoch does not describe this as legend. He describes it as administrative record, names, locations, chain of custody, the kind of language a scribe uses when documenting something they expect future officials to need. 11 copies of Enoch were found at Qumran in 1947 among the Dead Sea Scrolls. More copies than Deuteronomy. More than Exodus. More than most books that stayed in the Bible. Whoever buried those scrolls in the Judean desert considered Enoch essential. The church that banned it considered it dangerous. Those two facts are not in contradiction. They are the same facts stated from two different positions. In the next 25 minutes, you will see what the text actually says about the surviving bloodline, what the Egyptian administrative record from Sakara adds to that account, what the Babylonian tablet system corroborates about the lineage's movement after the flood, and why a ground-penetrating radar anomaly beneath the Khafre Causeway at Giza has not been excavated despite being identified in 2018. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I am about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the deleted Bloodline record, including the specific GE's passages removed from Western editions, the names of the scribal councils who authorized the removal, the Sakara catalog entries with their original field notes, word for word. I put it all into a written document. It is linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let us continue. The standard telling of the flood narrative gives you one surviving lineage. Noah, 8 people on a vessel, everyone else destroyed. That is the Genesis account. Enoch tells a different story, and it sits in plain text in chapters that Western translations have handled with consistent carelessness. Chapter 10 of Enoch records God's command to the archangel Raphael regarding the Watcher named Azazel. The Watchers, in Enochic literature, are the class of beings who descended from their proper station and took human women as wives. Their offspring, the Nephilim, are described as a race whose physical presence on earth was unauthorized. Chapter 7 records the consequence. The Nephilim consumed the resources of humanity, then consumed humanity itself. The flood, in Enoch's account, is not primarily a judgment on human sin. It is a containment operation. The target is the Nephilim bloodline and the corrupted genetics they had seeded into the general population. Here is the detail the standard telling omits. Chapter 8 identifies what the Watchers transmitted to the human women who bore their children. It is not only a physical inheritance. The Watchers' Enoch records taught the women specific knowledge: metallurgy, astrology, medicine, administrative systems, the enchantments and root cuttings. In the context of the ancient Near East, these are technical disciplines, fields of specialized knowledge that confer institutional power to those who hold them. The women who bore the children of the Watchers became, by virtue of what they were taught and what they carried genetically, a class of human being distinct from the general population. They held knowledge no one else had. They produced children physically and cognitively unlike the norm, and they appear to have been organized. The Ethiopian J.S. manuscript at Axum, in a passage that does not appear in the R.H. Charles 1906 translation or in subsequent Western editions, refers to this group using a compound term that Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the 1983 Oxford translation directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts, noted in a private correspondence later archived at the University of Manchester. The term translates as those who were sealed before the water came. Sealed, not destroyed, not scattered, sealed. The grammatical construction Isaac identified is the same one used elsewhere in Enoch to describe the imprisoned Watchers, beings placed deliberately in a specific condition by a specific authority for a specific purpose. The surviving women of the Watcher lineage were not refugees. They were preserved, and the text implies they were preserved by an authority operating outside the flood's mandate. Chapter 12 records Enoch being sent as a messenger to the imprisoned Watchers. He is to deliver their sentence. Eternal imprisonment, no intercession, no appeal. The answer he receives in chapter 14 is absolute refusal. There will be no mercy for the Watchers themselves. But the text is carefully silent on the question of their descendants. Their children are addressed in chapter 10. Their grandchildren and beyond are not addressed at all. That silence is the gap. In ancient legal and administrative texts, silence on a specific party in a judgment document is not oversight. It is position. Whatever was decided about the extended bloodline of the Watchers was either recorded elsewhere or deliberately excluded from this document. Enoch does not say what happened to the lineage that continued through the women who survived. He says only that they were sealed before the water came, and then the flood narrative moves on as though they do not exist. They did exist, and the administrative record of where they went next is not in Enoch, it is in Egypt. In the basement storage of the Cairo Museum, catalogued as JE 98944, there is a limestone relief fragment excavated from a shaft tomb at Sakara in 1954. The excavation was led by Ahmed Fakhri, a senior Egyptologist with the Egyptian Antiquities Organization. Fakhri's field notes, held at the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale in Cairo, describe the glyph sequence on the fragment in language that does not appear in the official registry entry that followed. The official registry, amended in 1971 under a different administration, classifies the fragment as decorative funerary art. Fakhri's original notes use the phrase, "a mechanism of unknown industrial purpose." The reclassification happened 17 years after excavation, without new analysis, under different institutional authority. Attached to the glyph sequence is a determinative, a classifier symbol that ancient Egyptian scribes used to indicate the conceptual category of a word. Determinatives do not get transliterated. They are frequently the first thing lost when a translation moves from primary source to published summary. The determinative Fakhri documented appears in only one other confirmed location in the entire hieroglyphic corpus, a papyrus from Deir el-Medina describing tools brought to a construction site, not a religious dedication, an inventory entry. The determinative changes the grammatical category of the entire phrase, from a spiritual act to a physical object. This is the first layer of the Sakara record. But the connection to Enoch's surviving bloodline is in the personnel records from the same excavation season. In the subsidiary chambers flanking the shaft tomb, Fakhri's team documented burial goods consistent with administrative authority, not with priestly or military roles. The individuals interred were not priests of Ptah. They were not soldiers. The grave goods indicate scribal and organizational function. Record keepers. People whose role was to know things and document them. A genomic study published in Nature Communications in 2019 extracted ancient DNA from individuals buried in the Sakara complex across a 500-year window spanning the core pyramid construction period. In the supplementary data, Table S7, 4 individuals from a pre-dynastic burial layer at Sakara carry a Y chromosome haplogroup variant that does not resolve into any known branch of the human lineage tree. The paper's authors flagged it as a low-confidence call, possible sequencing artifact. No follow-up analysis was conducted. The 4 individuals carrying the anomalous haplogroup are from the administrative burial layer, the knowledge-holding class. The people who documented what happened at this site and kept those records across generations. In Enoch's account, the women sealed before the water came held specialized knowledge, metallurgy, astronomy, administrative systems, medicine. The individuals at Sakara carrying anomalous genetic markers are from the administrative class, the class whose function was to hold and transmit institutional knowledge. Their burial goods do not indicate religious authority. They indicate informational authority, the authority to know and to document. The genetic anomaly in Table S7 has not been addressed in any published follow-up paper. The Sakara shaft tomb where JE 98944 was found has not been the subject of a dedicated iconographic study. The fragment sits in basement storage. The field notes that describe it differently from the official registry sit in a separate archive with no cross-reference to the museum catalog entry. Before we move on to what the Babylonian tablet system records about this lineage's movement, stop for a second. What you just heard about the Sakara administrative layer is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original JES passage. The anomalous haplogroup. The determinative classification. In October 1924, 12 feet below the surface of a dig site in southern Iraq, a junior excavator named Tariq Farouk found a clay tablet smaller than a man's palm, dense with cuneiform, Leonard Woolley picked it up and did not set it down for 40 minutes. What made Woolley still was not the density. It was the script. Every other tablet from that layer was written in a form of Sumerian his team could read without difficulty. This one was older. Not by decades. By centuries at minimum. A tablet written in a script that predated the civilization it was buried inside. Woolley called it the Anzu fragment in his field notes. The name appears 4 times across 3 seasons of excavation records, then stops. The tablet does not appear in any published catalog from the excavations. It is not in the British Museum. It is not in the Iraq Museum. No accession number has ever been assigned to it. A translation completed in 2021 by Dr. Nadia Voss at the Free University of Berlin reconstructed from high-resolution photographs of a 1,938 rubbing. Recovered approximately 70% of the text. What that 70% contains is not what anyone expected a Sumerian tablet of this age to hold. The text is written entirely in past tense. Every event it describes is framed as something the author witnessed, survived, and recorded for a reader who would come after. This is not how Sumerian prophetic literature works. The omen texts, the vast corpus of celestial and terrestrial divination tablets that survive from Mesopotamia, are written in conditional form. The Anzu fragment uses no conditional constructions. Its grammar is the grammar of testimony. The author is not forecasting. The author is remembering. What the Anzu fragment records, in the sections relevant to the surviving lineage, is a sequence of population movements in the period immediately following what the text calls the opening of the upper deep, the flood, described from the perspective of someone who was there. The author records specific groups of people who moved before the water came. Not during it, and not after. Before, people who had foreknowledge and acted on it before the general population had any warning. The author uses a grammatical construction to describe these groups that Voss identifies as distinct from the construction used for ordinary human populations elsewhere in the text. The groups who moved before the flood are marked with a classifier Voss translates with visible hesitation as those who carry what was given. The pronoun construction is plural but organized, not a scattered diaspora, a coordinated movement with a destination. The destinations the Anzu fragment names are specific. Interior highlands, stable bedrock, distance from coastlines. The same geographical principles, mapped onto modern topographic data, correspond to regions that show elevated population density in the archaeological record beginning shortly after 2900 BCE. The people who understood what was coming and moved early are the ones who left descendants. The connection to the Enochic bloodline is in the knowledge these groups carried. The Anzu fragment records that the organized groups brought with them what the text calls the records of the counting, administrative documentation, genealogical records, a system of tracking lineage and institutional knowledge across generations. It is the first thing mentioned in the list of what they transported, more important than material goods, more important than food stores or tools. In Enoch's account, the women sealed before the water came were taught administrative systems by the Watchers. The Anzu fragment records organized groups carrying administrative documentation systems to specific highland destinations before the flood. The same category of knowledge, the same timing, the same organizational structure. Woolley's personal journal, not the field notes that went to institutional archives, records that the chamber where the Anzu fragment was found was sealed from the inside. The clay used to seal the entrance had been applied from within. There was no mechanism by which someone who had applied the seal from within could have exited afterward. Someone went into that chamber and did not come out. They left the tablet on the floor, sealed themselves inside, and waited for what they knew was coming above them. The flood layer above the chamber is dated by 3 independent radiocarbon analyses to approximately 2900 BCE, the same era Enoch's astronomical content corresponds to. The same era from which archaeological evidence across the eastern Mediterranean shows sudden mass abandonment of coastal and river valley settlements. Entire cities left mid-occupation, tools in place, fires unextinguished. The Anzu fragment offers a different account. The people who moved did not move because conditions had become difficult. They moved because they understood what the signs meant and had received. Through a chain of transmission the archaeological record does not fully preserve. Instructions about where to go. The tablet ends with a single line. Voss marks it as the only passage she is fully confident in. The symbols are large, deeply pressed, showing no signs of compression damage. She translates it this way: "You already know what this is. You have seen the signs. The only question left is what you will do." What the lineage carried after the flood is documented in 3 parallel record systems that have never been formally connected in a single published paper. The Enochic text establishes the origin. The Sakara administrative record establishes the presence of anomalous genetic and institutional markers in Egypt's organizational class. The Babylonian tablet establishes the movement pattern. All 3 converge on the same functional description. A group of people who did not simply survive the flood, they managed through it. And what they managed was the continuity of a specific institutional knowledge system. That system had 4 components: metallurgical knowledge, astronomical knowledge, medical and pharmaceutical knowledge, administrative and record-keeping systems. These are not supernatural abilities. They are technical disciplines, fields in which mastery confers institutional power because they are difficult to acquire without transmission from someone who already holds them. You cannot independently discover written administrative systems. You cannot independently develop advanced astronomical calculation without a prior body of observation. These are inherited competencies. They require a chain of transmission. They require a lineage. After the flood, the groups who carried these disciplines arrived at the highland destinations, the Anzu fragment records, and did what organized groups with specialized institutional knowledge do. They administered, they documented, they built systems. And they controlled access to the knowledge they carried by controlling who they married and who they taught. The Egyptian record from Sakara shows this pattern in the Old Kingdom's organizational class. Anomalous genetic markers in the administrative layer, burial goods indicating informational rather than military or priestly authority, the knowledge-holding function concentrated in a specific group whose lineage is marked by a genetic signature that does not resolve into the general human family tree. The pattern continues in Mesopotamia. The cuneiform administrative tradition, the bureaucratic system that underlies every subsequent civilization in the ancient Near East, appears fully formed in the archaeological record. It does not develop gradually, it arrives. Scholars describe this as one of the most significant puzzles in the history of early civilization. The administrative apparatus of Uruk, the world's first city, appears without a clear developmental sequence preceding it. Someone brought it. The Anzu fragment's description of organized groups carrying records of the counting to highland destinations before the flood offers a transmission mechanism the conventional account does not have. The 4 disciplines Enoch identifies as transmitted by the Watchers are the foundational competencies of institutional power in every civilization from the ancient Near East to the present. The group that controls metallurgy controls military capacity and infrastructure. The group that controls astronomy controls calendars, agriculture, and temporal authority. The group that controls medicine controls human bodies. The group that controls administrative systems controls records, legal authority, and the documentation of who owns what. The Enochic text identifies the transmission of these disciplines to a specific lineage as the corrupting act that necessitated the flood. The flood was intended to end the transmission. The texts from Sakara, from Ur, and from the Ethiopian manuscripts suggest the transmission was not ended. It was moved. Beneath the Giza Plateau, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the Scan Pyramids project identified a series of subsurface anomalies beneath the causeway, connecting the Khafre Pyramid complex to its valley temple. One of those anomalies, designated as Anomaly G7 in the technical report, measures approximately 9 meters in its longest detected dimension and sits at a depth consistent with Old Kingdom subterranean construction. The anomaly was identified, it was logged, it was not excavated. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities classified the Khafre Causeway corridor as a protected zone pending a master plan for Giza subsurface investigation. That plan has been in development since 2018. No excavation permits for Anomaly G7 have been granted to any research team. The Wadi Hammamat inscription catalogued as Hammamat 87, dating to the reign of Mentuhotep II around 2000 BCE, records an expedition that brought back what the text identifies as the complete mechanism of the House of Ptah. The same compound phrase that appears on JE 98944 in Cairo Museum storage. The inscription records that the mechanism was placed beneath the House of the Horizon. In Old Kingdom topographical language, that phrase refers specifically to the Giza Plateau. Anomaly G7 sits at a precise point along the route Hammamat inscription 87 records. The permits remain pending. The void remains sealed. The Ethiopian manuscripts at Axum have been under restricted access since 1974. Dr. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, one of the foremost living authorities on Enoch scholarship, applied for access to the Axum manuscripts in 1988. Denied. He applied again in 1997. Denied. In a 2001 interview with Biblical Archaeology Review, Vanderkam stated that at least 3 passages in the J.S. manuscript tradition are known to scholars through secondary references but have not been available for direct examination in over 50 years. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible in 364 CE. The passages describing the surviving lineage of the Watcher's descendants were reclassified in early commentary as symbolic literature without geographical content. The Sakara fragment carrying a different reading was reclassified as decorative funerary art 17 years after its excavation without new analysis. The Anzu fragment from was never assigned an accession number and does not appear in any institutional catalog. The genomic anomaly in Table S7 of the 2019 Nature Communication study has not been the subject of any published follow-up paper. Each of those reclassifications happened independently, each in a different country, a different institution, a different century. Each removed a specific piece of evidence from active scholarly inquiry. And each piece of evidence, read alongside the others, describes the same thing. A lineage that the flood was designed to eliminate, that carried specific institutional knowledge through that elimination, and that left administrative fingerprints across every early civilization in the ancient Near East. The church removed Enoch from the Bible because it was too specific, because it named a lineage, because it described physical beings whose descendants could, in principle, be traced. That is the same reason the passages are dangerous now that it was in 364 CE, not because they describe something that happened 4,000 years ago, because they describe a transmission that did not stop. The documents are in basement storage. The anomaly is beneath sealed limestone. The manuscripts are behind restricted walls. The genomic data is in a supplementary table no one has followed up on. And the lineage the Book of Enoch says survived illegally is still, by all available evidence, surviving. The permits are still pending. The vaults are still locked. And the text that described this first was called "too dangerous to leave" in the Bible. Consider what it means for a church council to remove a book from Scripture specifically because its claims are too verifiable, not because they are false, not because they contradict theology, because they name locations, because they name lineages, because they can be checked, because they describe physical beings whose existence could be confirmed or denied by someone willing to look in the right place. The Council of Laodicea did not ban Enoch because it was mythology. They banned it because it was the opposite. It was not wrong.